on to our first topic, the Pope versus the Vatican. In this week's Spectator, Damian Thompson reveals what's really going on in Pope Francis's pontificate. We've seen already that he's a very charismatic Pope. He captures the attention of non-Christians worldwide. He's come back from a very successful tour of South Korea. But when he's back in Rome, what is he up to? Damian says it's nothing less than a complete overhaul of the Vatican structure and an attempt to do away with the influence of the Italian cardinals who killed his predecessor's papacy. Damian, that's quite some stuff you've got in the magazine this week. What, to the outsider, might we see to a papacy which is being redefined? Is this all the internal workings of the Vatican, or is there...
I think the whole point of this pontificate is to clean up the Vatican. That is why Cardinal Bergoglio was elected. I don't think the Cardinal realised that he was going to become this enormously charismatic figure who cultivated the press. But it's important not, I think, to be distracted by lots of the attention-grabbing and often contradictory things that Francis says, hinting at new attitudes towards homosexuality or marriage. They aren't going to happen. It's not on his agenda. His big agenda is to clean up the Vatican. He's basically declared war on the Curia, the Vatican, and particularly the Italian mafia who destroyed the pontificate of his predecessor, Benedict XVI.
How do they destroy the pontificate?
Well, Benedict rather unwisely put far too much power in the hands of his Secretary of State, sort of Prime Minister, Cardinal Bertone. One of the things Bertone did was that he oversaw the Vatican Bank. He oversaw a lot of the financial dealings of the church, and he wasted a lot of money. And there was a suspicion that he was far too close, and that many of his fellow cardinals and bishops and curial officials were far too close to sleazy Italian businessmen.
Are we talking about criminality here? Or
we're not necessarily talking about criminality, but what we're talking about is a cosy way of doing business by cardinals whose management of money is about as skillful as that of the Reverend Paul Flowers of the Co-op Bank in this country, basically. So Vatican had to write off a really, really big investment by Bertone, which he'd made despite everybody's professional advice to the contrary. So what Francis has done, and I think this has freaked out the liberals a bit, is that he's created a new Vatican department which has complete control of the church's finances, and he's put in charge of it as prefect Cardinal George Pell, who's one of the most conservative cardinals in the college.
He's a climate change skeptic.
He's a climate change skeptic. He was head of the church in Australia, and he's come over and taken over this new body. And from now on, nobody will be allowed to do deals as an individual. And Pell is going to appoint an independent auditor, and everything will be rigorously budgeted, and he'll be advised by highly successful people from the Anglosphere. Now, Pell's given interviews in which he kind of hints that there's a financial expertise in the Anglosphere that he values, and he's also said, rather interesting comment, that he thought it was a not necessarily a good thing that Benedict ended up with more Italian cardinals than he started with.
Is it the Protestant work ethic coming to Rome? Is that what's actually happening?
I don't think I think perhaps there's a touch of the Protestant work ethic about Pell, although he wouldn't like the word Protestant because the Australian church is actually very tribal. Yeah. But there's certainly a work ethic there. He's immensely clever. He's got an Oxford doctorate. He's so much brighter than the vast majority of the grim, dismal, jargon-spouting English bishops, who are not very highly regarded in Rome.
Freddy, you were in Rome before the Pope's election, and it's funny that nothing is more political than the Vatican at that sort of time. Was there a sense then that you needed a regime change at the Vatican which went deeper than just a new personality, that you needed a new mechanism, and that this election was about sweeping out an old order and replacing it with a new?
Definitely. I mean, you just had this bombshell of Benedict resigning, and everybody I spoke to, liberal, conservative, traditionalist, progressive, whatever type of Catholic they were all adamant that the Curia was the problem. Something's got to be done to fix this rot at the heart of the church.
And Ms. Roth, I mean, was it just simply about leaking money? I mean, well, terrible, but it doesn't sound that scandalous.
Well, it's always very hard to get to the truth of it. There's always sort of very, the Italian papers will publish this incredibly sensational stuff about, kind of gay mafias and the sort of stuff you read in the Da Vinci Code, But while all that's exaggerated, there's certainly corruption in there. There's sort of favours being carried out within the Vatican Bank, and then of course there's the clerical abuse problem, which was very badly handled by the Curia for a couple of decades. But the people I spoke to, what was quite interesting, is they all thought that it's such a typically Italian problem that you need an Italian to come in and fix it. And then of course we have Bergoglio, who is sort of Italian, but he's actually Latin American.
I think he understands Italians. He speaks the language fluently. Actually, one of his problems is that he doesn't speak English. He's never been to America, though he's going to go there. He's never been to this country, as far as I know. So, in Latin America, and he is a very Latin American figure, the priests he sees evangelizing successfully have got their hands dirty in the slums, tend to be very leftward leaning, and Bergoglio himself has moved in that direction, having been a very conservative leader of the
liberation theology.
He used to clamp down on liberation theology. Now he favours aspects of it because he says these are the priests who work, and conservatives in Latin America, not very effective or very nice. In the Anglosphere, in America and in Britain and in Australia, it's conservative priests who get their hands dirty, who work hard, who evangelize,
and also who tend to build congregations.
Build congregations. I mean, the big crisis, and this has been confirmed to me by extremely senior people in Rome. In the big crisis in the English Church is that you have a mafia of the mediocre.
And is it the impression that this is what frustrated Pope Benedict, that he basically decided that he couldn't do anything with his papacy because the Curia, the guys beneath him, were unbiddable? I mean, I was at the impression that the Pope was an absolute monarch who could do pretty much what he wanted.
Well, he could. I think a lot of conservatives feel a bit let down by the way Benedict, who was really too old, I think. Great man in many ways, great reformer in liturgical respects, but he was really too old when he became Pope. And he's also rather kind. He was called a Rottweiler. The Rottweiler is Francis, not Benedict, actually, and he couldn't cope with the escalating scandals, many of which involved people who were close to him or their deadly opponents, and the factionalism just got to him, and he went away and wrote books. This Pope has decided to bypass the Italian mafia in the Vatican by appointing a cabinet of cardinals from around the world. And it's a kind of mess, and in some ways, but it does mean there's change. Power will be devolved to individual bishops' conferences, which, if you look at how awful the English bishops' conference is, may not seem like good news, but actually the nuncios, the Pope's ambassadors run by the Secretary of State, are pretty useless. The important thing, it's been stressed to me by senior people in Rome, is that the Italians who killed, and this is the word they use, killed the pontificate of Benedict XVI, have gone, and they're not coming back.
Right. But Freddy, I mean, if you're going to be in Rome, taking on Italian cardinals, it's a pretty daunting task, isn't it? I mean, do you think Pope Francis stands any more of a chance than Benedict did?
Well, I think yes, and partly because he's got this sort of huge popular following behind him. So yes, I think this is a golden opportunity, because there's such a widespread feeling that enough's enough. The resignation of Benedict was proof that the system is totally rotten. Right. So I think this is a golden opportunity. Whether he can do it whether Pell can do it for him is a difficult question to answer.
But Pell's already done a lot.
Yeah.
In terms of finance.
Oh my goodness, yes. I mean, he's set up. It's not just Pell, but these structures have been set up for him.
So how will we know if Pope Francis has triumphed then and has actually managed to sweep out the old Curia and get rid of it? Are we going to have lots of Argentinians wandering around instead of Italians?
We do. There's already lots of Latin Americans wandering around, making quite a nuisance of themselves, saying, "Oh, we are simple people. We're returning the church to the gospel," and this is, of course, driving people in the Curia mad. And I can kind of understand why. By and large, it doesn't work. How we measure the success? Well, actually, if you look at Pell's department, you will see there will be balance sheets. You will see whether money is being generated, because they've got to generate money in order to spend it. You will see where it is being spent. Is it being spent on proper missionary activity, on evangelization, or is it being dribbled away on climate change activism?
Will we see lots of Italians being sort of sacked or thrown out of the Vatican?
Well, they'll be sidelined. Quite a few Italians who advised were financial advisors. They were priests have been sacked, but I think what we will see is the end of a culture of, stuffing your face in a trattoria and quietly arranging, the setting up of a dodgy charity.
Mm-hmm.
Pell will shine a light onto that. That's a great thing. If Francis can achieve that, that's marvellous. If he can also, another thing I mentioned just very briefly in the article, if he can reform the Jesuits, he'll have achieved a lot, even if, as he said this week, I shall be gathered to the house of my father in 3 or 4 years' time, which is a typical, say, teasing Francis comment.